You thought they were the calm one, the unbothered one, the detached one, the one who never chased. Until the day you stopped reacting. No more emotional speeches. No more long explanations. No more proving your love. No more panic texts. You regulated. And something strange happened. They didn't relax. They destabilized. Because what looked like indifference was never independence. It was regulation. Through you, there is a dynamic most people never name. One person appears steady. The other appears emotional. One withdraws. The other reacts. It looks like imbalance, but it is actually a system, a nervous system loop. When you were anxious, activated, trying to fix, trying to explain, trying to hold it together. You thought you were the unstable one. You weren't. You were the regulator. Anxious attachment is often mislabeled as weakness, but beneath it is hyperattunement. You track tone shifts, micro expressions, delayed responses, energy changes. You felt everything. And when you felt distance, you moved toward it, texted, called, explained, reassured, fought for clarity. That reaction did something very specific. It stabilized them. Avoidant nervous systems often rely on external activation to maintain equilibrium. They do not look anxious, but they regulate through polarity. When you escalated, they could go calm. When you pursued, they could withdraw. When you reacted, they could feel in control. Your emotional movement gave them structure. It gave them a position, the stable one, the rational one, the less invested one. But the moment you stopped reacting, the polarity collapsed. And that's when things shifted. Because if you are no longer escalating, they cannot stabilize. Through withdrawal, if you are no longer chasing, they cannot regulate. Through distance, if you are calm, there is no contrast. And without contrast, their nervous system loses its anchor. This is what people misunderstand about power dynamics. Power is not about dominance. It is about regulation. Who stabilizes the emotional field? For a long time, it was you. Even when you felt out of control, you were maintaining the system. Your tears kept them steady. Your anxiety kept them grounded. Your protest kept them positioned. So when you finally regulated, not suppressed, regulated, something destabilized in them. Because now, they had to self-regulate without your activation. And that is unfamiliar territory for someone who learned to manage intimacy through distance. Let's go deeper. Avoidant attachment often develops in environments where emotional dependency felt unsafe. So the child learned, I will not need, I will not chase, I will not show. But here is the hidden layer. They still needed co-regulation. Every human does. They just outsourced it to someone more expressive. When you became emotional, you externalized tension. You carried the visible activation. They carried the visible calm. But internally, they were using your reaction as feedback. Your pursuit reassured them. They mattered. Your emotional intensity confirmed they were significant. Your fear of losing them proved attachment. So even while appearing detached, they were receiving validation through your dysregulation, not consciously, not maliciously. Nervous systems are efficient. They repeat what works. If your reaction restores their sense of control, the pattern continues. Until one day, you didn't react. You responded. Or maybe you didn't even respond. You paused. You breathed. You let silence sit. You didn't chase the distance. You didn't argue the withdrawal. You didn't beg for reassurance. And something subtle happened. They felt it. Because the system was used to your activation. And when activation disappeared, their body searched for it. This is the moment Many people misinterpret. They think they suddenly care. They're afraid to lose me. They're spiraling. What is actually happening is regulation withdrawal. When someone becomes accustomed to stabilizing through your reaction, your emotional neutrality creates uncertainty, and uncertainty activates them. The avoidant nervous system is comfortable when it has space, but it is not comfortable when the emotional field goes quiet in a new way. Your calm is not the same as their calm. Their calm was distance-based. Yours became grounded. Distance-based calm says, I don't need you. Grounded calm says, I'll be okay either way. Those are very different energies, and nervous systems detect that difference. The day you stopped reacting is the day the script flipped, because now there was no emotional leverage, no protest to stabilize against, no panic to reassure, no emotional wave to step away from, just presence. And presence, without pursuit, is confronting for someone who relied on pursuit to feel wanted. Let's make something clear. This is not about manipulation. It's not about playing hard to get. It's not about pretending not to care. It only works when it's real, when your nervous system actually calms down, when you genuinely detach from the need to force connection, when you stop managing their emotions for them. That shift is internal, and internal shifts reorganize relational dynamics. Because relationships are systems, when one part changes, the entire structure adjusts. You stopped reacting, which means you stopped regulating the entire dynamic. And for the first time, they had to feel their own uncertainty without your anxiety absorbing it. That's when spiraling begins. Not always dramatic, sometimes subtle. More texts, longer pauses before replying, random check-ins, increased sensitivity to your tone, sudden curiosity about where you are. Not because they became anxious overnight, but because the external regulator is no longer compensating. You were not too emotional. You were carrying shared activation. And when you set it down, they felt the weight. This is why emotional growth can feel destabilizing to a relationship, especially one built on imbalance. When you regulate yourself, you remove the crutch, and anyone who leaned on that crutch has to learn to stand differently. Some will rise, some will panic, some will pull closer, some will pull away harder, but none of them remain unaffected because regulation is contagious, and so is sovereignty. The day you stopped reacting was not the day you lost power. It was the day you stopped leaking it. And nervous systems notice when the energy shifts, even if no one says it out loud. When you stopped reacting, you did something radical. You removed predictability, not chaos. Predictability. The old pattern was stable because it was known. They withdraw. You pursue. They delay. You explain. They go silent. You fill the silence. It had rhythm, dysfunctional rhythm, but rhythm nonetheless. And nervous systems love rhythm, even unhealthy ones, because predictability equals safety. When you regulated, you disrupted the rhythm. You didn't argue the delay. You didn't over-explain your feelings. You didn't chase clarity. You let space exist without trying to control it. And space, without protest, feels different. Before, space meant they're pulling away. Now space means you're not grasping. That difference activates something unexpected. Avoidant attachment is often mistaken for a lack of need, but it is not a lack of need. It is a discomfort with visible need. They still require reassurance. They still require significance. They still require attachment cues. They just prefer to receive them indirectly, through pursuit, through reaction, through your emotional investment. When you reacted strongly, you were signaling, you matter, you affect me, you are important enough to disturb my nervous system. That is powerful validation. So when you became steady, and your mood no longer rose and fell based on their behavior, their nervous system registered a shift. If they're not reacting, am I still significant? This is where spiraling begins. Not because they are weak, but because the co-regulation source changed. Let's talk about co-regulation addiction. It sounds dramatic, but it is subtle. If someone grows up without consistent emotional attunement, they may unconsciously seek partners who are expressive, emotionally reactive, highly invested, because expressive partners externalize attachment. They make it visible, they prove it, and that visibility becomes stabilizing. The avoidant partner does not have to ask. They do not have to expose need. They can simply observe your reaction, and your reaction tells them everything. But once you regulate, they lose that data stream. No reaction means no signal. No protest means no confirmation. No emotional spike means no evidence. And that uncertainty creates internal activation. You may not see it immediately. Avoidants do not spiral loudly. They spiral quietly, internally, overthinking, replaying conversations, testing the temperature, sending subtle probes. Are you okay? You seem different. Everything good? What they are really asking is, are you still attached? Because when you stop reacting, you stop proving. And when you stop proving, they must feel. That is unfamiliar. For a long time, you may have believed they had more power. They could disappear for hours. They could detach mid-conversation. They could remain composed while you unraveled. But that composure was conditional. It required your activation. The power was not in their silence. It was in your reaction to it. Once your reaction disappeared, the silence lost its leverage. And leverage removal is destabilizing. There is something deeply uncomfortable about facing your own attachment needs without someone else amplifying them. When you were anxious, they could say, I'm not the emotional one. When you calmed down, that contrast vanished. Now there was no emotional distraction, just two nervous systems, equal, unmasked. That equality can feel threatening to someone used to polarity, because polarity organizes identity. You were the emotional one. They were the calm one. Now who are they? If you're calm too, identity shifts are more destabilizing than conflict. Conflict is familiar. Identity collapse is not. The day you stopped reacting, force them into a new role, one where they might have to initiate, reach out, express, risk. That is not comfortable for someone who built safety around distance. So spiraling may show up as increased checking, subtle jealousy, sudden intensity, unexpected vulnerability, or even irritation. Yes, sometimes they escalate when you calm down, because your steadiness feels like withdrawal, even if it's not. Your regulation removes the emotional charge that once held the dynamic together, and without charge, they must access their own. This is where many people sabotage themselves, because when the avoidant finally reacts, the anxious partner panics. See, they care. They're afraid to lose me. And immediately, they drop regulation and resume reaction, which restores the old system. But the real transformation happens when you stay steady, not cold, not distant, steady, responsive but not reactive, available but not chasing, present but not proving. That steadiness forces the relationship to reorganize. It either evolves into mutual regulation, or it collapses. And collapse is not failure. It is information. Because if a relationship only functions. When one person is dysregulated, it was never stable. It was dependent, dependent on imbalance, dependent on polarity, dependent on someone, carrying the emotional field. You carried it for a long time. You mistook that burden for weakness. It wasn't weakness. It was labor, emotional labor, constant scanning, constant adjusting, constant reacting. When you stopped, you didn't lose power. You reclaimed bandwidth, and reclaimed bandwidth feels like detachment to someone who relied on your intensity. They may accuse you of changing. You did. They may say you're distant. You're regulated. They may say you don't care, like you used to. You care without panic now. That difference is disorienting. For someone who equated panic with love, let's say something clearly. Regulation is attractive, not because it's cold, but because it's grounded. Grounded energy cannot be controlled through withdrawal. Grounded energy does not chase, it observes, it decides. And when you become that energy, the power dynamic equalizes, not through manipulation, through nervous system maturity. If they spiral, it is not because you are punishing them, it is because they must now meet themselves without your activation, buffering the discomfort. That is growth territory, and growth territory always feels unstable at first. The question is not, why are they spiraling? The question is, will they rise into regulation or try to pull you back into reaction? Your steadiness is a mirror now, and mirrors are confronting, especially for someone who preferred shadows. Stay steady. That's where real leverage lives. There is a moment after the shift that feels almost unreal. You're calm. You're clear. You're no longer over-explaining. And suddenly, they're the one overthinking. They're the one reading into your tone. They're the one asking, what changed? That reversal is not random. It's nervous system recalibration. For a long time, they regulated through contrast. You were expressive. They were reserved. You were activated. They were contained. That contrast created balance. Not healthy balance, but functional balance. Once you remove the activation, their containment had nothing to press against. And here's the truth most people miss. Avoidant stability often depends on emotional distance being maintained. When you were reactive, they could justify space. When you were anxious, they could justify withdrawal. But when you became grounded, space started to feel different. It no longer felt like relief. It felt like risk. Because now you're calm. Doesn't chase. And if calm doesn't chase, distance no longer guarantees that you'll stay. That realization is destabilizing. Avoidant attachment is not about not caring. It's about managing closeness in controlled doses. Too much closeness feels engulfing. Too much distance feels unsafe. When you reacted emotionally, they could measure the closeness. Your intensity proved detachment. Now that you're steady, there are fewer signals, fewer emotional spikes, fewer visible proofs, which means they have to tolerate ambiguity. And ambiguity activates attachment. Yes, even avoidant attachment, because underneath the distance is still a human nervous system that fears loss. The difference is how that fear expresses itself. Anxious fear is loud. Avoidant fear is quiet. Anxious fear protests. Avoidant fear calculates. Anxious fear reaches. Avoidant fear withdraws first to avoid being left. But when you stopped reacting, their strategy lost precision. Withdrawal no longer triggered pursuit. Silence no longer triggered panic. Delay no longer triggered explanation. Which means the old lever stopped working. That is when subtle spiraling begins. They may check your social media more. Notice who you're around. Pay closer attention to how quickly you reply, not because they became insecure overnight, but because the environment changed. You removed emotional predictability, and nervous systems crave orientation. There is something psychologically profound here. When someone regulates through your emotion, they become dependent on your dysregulation, not consciously, but structurally. Your highs and lows organize the system. Once those highs and lows flatten, they must find internal orientation. And internal orientation requires emotional literacy, which many avoidants were never taught. So instead of saying, I feel uncertain, it might come out as, you're acting different. You're distant lately. You don't seem the same. What they're sensing is your stability. But stability feels unfamiliar in a system built on imbalance. Let's make something clear. Your regulation is not punishment. It's not a tactic. It's not emotional withholding. It's nervous system maturity. And maturity disrupts immature dynamics. That disruption can feel like loss to someone who benefited from the old structure, because under the old structure, they never had to initiate. They never had to risk vulnerability first. They never had to sit with uncertainty. You carried that discomfort. Now it belongs to them. This is where the relationship either levels up or fractures. If they lean in, if they start communicating more clearly, if they risk saying, I don't want to lose you, then the system evolves. It becomes mutual, balanced, adult. But if they attempt to provoke reaction, pull away harder, create jealousy, increase unpredictability, that's not spiraling toward growth. That's spiraling toward control. Because if they can reactivate your anxiety, they restore the familiar polarity. They regain the old position, and the system resets. This is why your steadiness must be consistent, not cold, not detached, consistent. Consistency teaches nervous systems that regulation is safe. If you wobble every time they test, the old pattern regains dominance. But if you remain grounded, responsive without overfunctioning, something powerful happens. They either rise to meet your level of regulation, or they feel the gap widen. And that gap reveals capacity, not potential. Capacity. Potential is what someone could be. Capacity is what they demonstrate. Under pressure, the day you stopped reacting revealed capacity, because now the system is exposed, without emotional fireworks, to distract from it. There's another layer. When you were reactive, you were emotionally transparent. They could read you easily. Your love was loud. Your fear was visible. Your attachment was obvious. Now that you're regulated, you're less readable, and less readability removes advantage. For someone who relied on reading your activation to feel secure, your calm becomes mysterious, and mystery activates pursuit, not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer overextending your internal state. You're centered, and centered energy does not chase clarity. It allows clarity to emerge. That shift alone reorganizes attraction, because stability feels different. It's quieter, stronger, less available to manipulation. When you no longer react to withdrawal, withdrawal loses its power. When you no longer escalate conflict, conflict loses its hook. When you no longer over-explain, silence loses its threat. And when those levers stop working, the only option left is direct engagement. Some avoidants rise here. They realize they can no longer maintain connection through distance. They must participate. Others retreat permanently, because connection, without control, feels too vulnerable. Neither outcome is a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their readiness. Your job is not to destabilize someone. Your job is not to provoke spiraling. Your job is to regulate yourself and allow the system to reorganize honestly. When you stopped reacting, you stopped carrying both nervous systems. You returned responsibility, and responsibility reveals truth. The truth about attachment, the truth about effort, the truth about who can meet you at your level of regulation. That truth may feel uncomfortable, but it is clean, and clean dynamics do not require emotional chaos to survive. They require presence, and presence cannot be faked for long. Stay steady. The spiraling will show you everything. There is something deeply powerful about emotional non-reaction, not silence, not suppression, not pretending you don't care. True regulation, the kind where your nervous system is no longer hijacked by someone else's inconsistency. The day you stopped reacting was not the day you became cold. It was the day you became anchored. Anchored people are not dramatic. They are not easily pulled. They don't rush to fix distance. They don't panic at silence. They don't chase clarity. They observe. They respond. They choose. And that shift changes everything. Because when you regulate yourself, you stop participating in unconscious power exchanges. You stop proving. You stop performing attachment. You stop outsourcing your stability. And when you do that, anyone who is regulating through your emotion has to confront something uncomfortable. Their connection to you was partially dependent on your dysregulation. That realization can feel like loss, not loss of love, loss of control, because your reaction used to guarantee engagement. Your anxiety guaranteed conversation. Your pursuit guaranteed contact. Your emotional spikes guaranteed relevance. Now your steadiness guarantees nothing, and that uncertainty is confronting. But here's the mature truth. If a relationship only feels alive when one person is emotionally activated, it is not intimacy, it is stimulation. And stimulation is not stability. Real connection can survive calm. It can survive space. It can survive two regulated nervous systems looking at each other without drama holding them together. If they spiral when you regulate, that is information. If they rise when you regulate, that is also information. You don't need to decode every text. You don't need to analyze every shift. You don't need to return to reaction to feel chosen. Your steadiness is the test, not a game, a filter. Because when you are no longer reactive, you are no longer easy to manage through inconsistency. And that forces authenticity. Some people will lean in. They'll feel the shift and meet it with growth. They'll communicate more clearly. They'll initiate more intentionally. They'll risk more honesty. Others will try to destabilize you. They'll increase unpredictability. They'll create subtle tension. They'll attempt to pull you back into the old dance. But here's the difference now. You see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You recognize when someone needs your anxiety to feel secure. You recognize when silence is being used as leverage. You recognize when distance is meant to trigger pursuit. And recognition ends unconscious participation. The goal is not to make them spiral. The goal is to become so internally regulated that spiraling no longer controls you. Because here is the deeper shift. When you were reactive, you thought love required intensity. Now you understand. Love requires stability. When you were anxious, you thought closeness required effort. Now you understand. Closeness requires mutual capacity. When you were dysregulated, you thought power belonged to the one who cared less. Now you understand. Power belongs to the one who is centered. Centered people do not chase. They also do not punish. They simply respond from grounded awareness. And that grounded awareness reshapes attachment dynamics. You are no longer trying to win. You are no longer trying to prove. You are no longer trying to secure someone through emotional performance. You are secure within yourself. And that kind of security is confronting to anyone who relied on imbalance. The day you stopped reacting was the day you stopped negotiating with your nervous system. You chose peace over adrenaline, clarity over chaos, presence over panic. And that decision elevates you, not above them, above the pattern. If they meet you there, the relationship matures. If they don't, you still win. Because regulation is never a loss, it is alignment. And alignment attracts what is capable of meeting it. If this resonated, don't just watch it, reflect on it. Ask yourself honestly, when I stopped reacting, did the dynamic shift? Did they lean in? Or did they try to pull me back? Your answer reveals the structure of your relationship. If you want more psychology like this, no blame, no games, no manipulation, just clear breakdowns of attachment patterns and nervous system dynamics, subscribe. This channel is about emotional sovereignty, about understanding power without abusing it, about regulating yourself so you can see clearly who is able to stand with you without needing you unstable. Comment below. What happened when you stopped reacting? Did they spiral or did they grow? Your experience might help someone else recognize their own pattern. And if this gave you language for something you've felt but couldn't explain, share it with someone who still thinks their anxiety is weakness. It's not. It was awareness. Without regulation. Now you have both. Stay steady. That's where real power lives.